Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys for coming out for this evening's event. Tonight's event is hosted by Ratio Christi, a student organization at WMU dedicated to examining evidence for and against the Christian worldview. Ratio Christi is a club for those who believe that the Christian faith is not opposed by evidence, but that it explains the evidence in an intellectually satisfying way. For those who would like to further probe the issues raised in tonight's event, we invite you to join us on Tuesday nights, 7 to 11 in Moore Hall. 7 to 9, excuse me, that'd be a long night. But I mean, these topics are so interesting, I'm sure lots of us would be able to stay that long. 7 to 9, in Moore Hall. And you can get more information about us in the back. We do have a table, so check us out after the event. There are many opinions about what faith is. The well-known atheist Richard Dawkins has said that, quote, faith is belief in spite of, and even perhaps because of the lack of evidence. Faith is not allowed to justify itself by argument, unquote. On the other end of the spectrum, there are those who think that faith should and can be informed by evidence and reason. And for centuries, philosophers, rulers, humans from every walk of life, and students, like many of us, have seriously contemplated the question of God's existence. Is it reasonable to believe in God? But the wonder has not stopped there. Many people want to know, has God revealed himself in history? What difference, if any, would God make in my life? What about all the suffering in the world? Or to touch on a question that has kept many of us up late at night, why did God allow me to get an F on my philosophy paper? And the questions go on. The primary goal of tonight's event is educational. We will be hearing one perspective regarding these issues with the hope that substantive and continued reflection will take place. Before introducing our guest, allow me to address both the format and spirit of this event. First, Dr. Turek will give an opening presentation. Afterwards, we will have a time of Q&A where you, the audience, will have the opportunity to ask Dr. Turek any question related to tonight's topic that is weighing on your mind. And I'll explain how that goes when we get there. Finally, we ask that you join us in maintaining an atmosphere of respect and charity throughout the night. Frank Turek is an award-winning author, speaker, and the host of the radio show Cross-Examined, which airs on 144 stations every Saturday night at 10 a.m. Eastern. He also hosts an hour-long TV program each week called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist that is broadcast Wednesday nights and Saturday nights on DirecTV, Channel 378, the NRB network. His books include Correct, Not Politically Correct, Legislating Morality, and I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. He has debated atheist Christopher Hitchens twice. A former aviator in the U.S. Navy, Frank has a master's from George Washington University and a doctorate in apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Turek.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There's one guy here. You know, there's a lot of people hopefully watching on the internet. Thanks to Tactical Faith, they're streaming this live. And here's our hashtag if you want to talk about this tonight as we go. It is XExam, so everyone can see what everyone else is saying. So check that out. Now, whenever you talk about a topic like I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, it's going to be extremely controversial. So it's absolutely critical that you listen closely, because I don't want you walking out of here thinking I said something I did not say. If you don't listen closely, the results can be disastrous. So it's absolutely critical you listen closely. You guys ready to go? Yeah. Well, the first question I always ask people is, why are you here? I don't mean why are you here tonight at Western Michigan University, but why are you here on earth? What is the purpose of your life? This is the interactive portion of the program. I mean, why are we here? Is life just a glorified Monopoly game? You get a whole bunch of stuff now, and when the game is over, it all goes back in the box. Is that what life's all about? Well, if the atheists are right, that's what life is all about. This is Francis Crick, who looks a little creepy to me. Francis Crick, as you know, discovered the DNA molecule, and in 1994 he wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis. And this was his astonishing hypothesis, that you, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. In other words, you are nothing but a molecular machine. This is materialism. Every thought you have, everything you think about, every decision you make is a result of a previous natural cause over which you have no control. You may think you have free will, you may think you're reasoning, you may think you're a person who can make free will decisions, but you really are not. You're nothing but a molecular machine. So there is no real purpose to life. You just die and become worm food, and that is it. I don't think Crick is right. I think there is a real purpose to life, and you can find that purpose in this ancient collection of documents we put under one binding we now call the Bible. Now, when you say this book is true, particularly on a college campus, people think you're nuts. Are you crazy? You think this book is actually true? First of all, it's got miracles in it. We don't believe in miracles anymore. Didn't David Hume disprove miracles? Why should we believe in miracles? We don't seem to see them today. Miracles can't occur. And it was written by religious fanatics who embellish this kind of stuff. You know how religious people are. This book can't be true. I actually think you can show it's true beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond all doubt. Of course I could be wrong. I'm not an omniscient being. But I think, when I was 17 I was, but I'm not an omniscient being anymore, okay? I think you can show this book is true by just answering 4 questions in the affirmative. In other words, if you answer yes to these 4 questions, you can show beyond any reasonable doubt that Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that groovin' music is from our TV show, which is on, as Joel mentioned, it's on every Wednesday nights and Saturday nights on DirecTV, channel 378. How many people here have DirecTV? Can you show your hands, please? DirecTV. 4 of us. Come on, why not the rest of us? Friends don't let friends watch cable. Well, forget it. You can't. Well, actually, you can watch it, because if you go to our website, right there, crossexamine.org, at those times, and click on TV show, you can watch it live. We're also on radio, as you mentioned, every Saturday morning, but that is podcasted, so you can listen to it anytime. Or if you get our new app, we have a new app I'll tell you about a little bit later, has all the podcasts on it. In 1 hour a week, we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. Well, let's deal with truth first. If there is no truth, if it's just true for you but not for me, or all truth is relative, then quite obviously this book can't be true. Of course, if there is no truth, then any book written by an atheist can't be true either. Right? We'll deal with the truth question first. Second question, does God exist? You can't have a word from God if there is no God. If there's no God, throw the Bible away and every other book that talks about God. But I hope to show you tonight that there really is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent, sustaining creator cause out there. That's what we call a theistic God. We're going to use 3 arguments. 2 of them have scientific evidence behind them. 1 has philosophical evidence behind them. These arguments are taught in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, we're not even going to refer to the Bible all that much tonight at all. Then and only then can we get to question 3, are miracles possible? Obviously, the Bible can't be true if miracles are not possible. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and we have scientific evidence for it. I hope to show you that evidence tonight. Then, question 4, the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer. If truth doesn't exist, God doesn't exist, or miracles are not possible. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if we have an accurate, historically reliable account of miracles occurring in the 1st century to a man named Jesus and his apostles, as evidenced in the 27 handwritten Greek manuscripts we've put under one binding we now call the New Testament. Did those people tell the truth, or again, were they written down much later by religious zealots who simply made it all up? Now, In the amount of time we have here tonight, there's no way I can cover all this material. I mean, the book is 448 pages. Actually, I probably could cover it because I'm originally from New Jersey. Okay? That's right. I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts to 350. All right? So I go really quickly. If you want to go deeper, you can get the book or a DVD set that's 7 hours. It's 12, 30 to 40-minute segments. If you want to take a group through it, there's also a curriculum you can get online. There's our website. And by the way, I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know, I've got 3 sons, so I need some help. In fact, 2 are in the Air Force already. 1 is about to get out of college. He's about to graduate, University of South Carolina. They all went to South Carolina. They're all Gamecocks. And my wife and I have been basically empty nesters for the past 3 years. It actually took us a while to get used to that. About 10 minutes. Yeah, that's how long it took to change the locks. Do we have any empty nesters in here? We see a few people in here. You notice how clean the house stays when they're gone? It's pretty amazing. We love our kids, but they're a little messy. Anyway, there's our website, crossexamine.org, so if you want to go deeper, you can. And actually what we're going to do tonight, this is actually a 2-part series. We're going to cover point 1, does truth exist? Point 2, does God exist? And then we're going to go to questions. I may say a few words about miracles. I'll just talk about them. Joel said he's actually going to do a miracle later, so get ready for that. But in any event, we're just going to cover point 1 and point 2 and then go to questions. And then maybe next semester we'll come back and we'll do part 2. We'll do miracles and the New Testament true. But if you have a question on the New Testament, if we have time, we'll deal with it a little bit later. But there's so much material here that we can't do the whole thing here tonight, all right? Oh, and by the way, if I time this just right, we'll have absolutely no time for your questions. Actually, I think tonight I'm just going to do Q, no A. Is that okay? Great question, sir. Oh, that's another great question, ma'am. We'll just do that. Is that cool? No. We'll take your questions, all right? So we're going to start here at point 1. Does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? All right, let's start at truth exists. Does truth exist? And whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? I mean, Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, "You can't get the truth." Broncos, come on. Come on. That was weak. That was not New Jersey strong. "Colonel, I want the truth." You can't get the truth. That's right. Well, there's a lot of people out there that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, there is no truth, all truth is relative. Before we get into that, let's define what we mean by truth. Here's an easy definition of truth. Truth is telling it like it is. If I say here we are at Western Michigan University, that would be telling it like it is. If I say here we are at UT Dallas, where I'll be next week, that wouldn't be telling it like it is. Or we might say truth is what corresponds to its referent. If I'm referring to this book, I say this is a Bible, that would be true. If I say it's a Quran, it wouldn't be true. You say, "Frank, I came out for this. This is so obvious. Why are you starting here?" Because our first duty in today's culture is to state the obvious. There's people out there denying there's truth. They won't even define what it is. So those are good definitions of truth. Now hold on to that thought, because we're going to come back to truth here. But first, we need to talk about the law of non-contradiction, which helps us discover what is false. The law of non-contradiction says opposite ideas cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, the earth can't be both round and not round at the same time and in the same sense. Right? It's either round or it's not round, but it's not both. Are you guys with me? All right, good. You say, okay, that's fine. What does this have to do with God and religion? Well, some people try and say that the law of non-contradiction does not apply to religious claims. It just applies to like scientific claims or logical claims or that kind of thing. I'm here to say that's not true. In fact, let me give you the most basic religious claim out there. Here it is. Does God exist? The man on the right is the most famous atheist in the world today. His name is Richard Dawkins, as you know. He wrote the book, The God Delusion. He taught at Oxford University. He says God does not exist. The man on the left is Oxford professor John Lennox, who says God does exist. In fact, he's written a number of books in support of God. Now, here is my question. Can both of these men be right about this particular topic? No, they both can't be right. If Lennox is right, Dawkins is wrong. If Dawkins is right, Lennox is wrong. But they're both not right and they're both not wrong. Right? Right. Now, who's right here? I'll give you a hint. You're having trouble. It's Lennox. All right? I'm actually going to give you some evidence it's Lennox. But first, I just want to point out that the law of non-contradiction applies to religious claims. Now, by the way, if you want to see an amazing debate, you need to go to our website, or you can probably just find this if you Google it. Google Lennox-Dawkins debate, because these two gentlemen have debated 2 or 3 times, and it's not a dueling speech debate where, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. They actually just sit there and they talk to one another back and forth. Both men are brilliant. Both men have British accents, so they sound even more brilliant. And it's a lot of fun. Now, John Lennox is the most likable guy in the world. You cannot dislike John Lennox. He is just a jovial Irishman. He's always smiling. He's got all these witty little quips. And as you know, sometimes Richard Dawkins can come across a little dour. And so one reviewer of their debate said, watching John Lennox debate Richard Dawkins was like watching Santa Claus debate the devil. But you've got to check it out for yourself. Just check it out. It's a fabulous exchange. Now, the law of non-contradiction is undeniable. Even those who deny it use it. Suppose you catch a friend of yours in a contradiction and your friend just doesn't want to hear it. I mean, you say, look, that's contradictory. And he goes, I don't even believe in the law of non-contradiction. What should you say to your friend? You should say, you do believe in it. He's going to say, no, I don't. You say, you do believe in it. He's going to say, no, I don't. You say, you do believe in it. You're using it right now to contradict me. You see, you can't think a thought without the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction is to thinking what your eyes are to seeing. You can't see without eyes, and you can't think without the law of non-contradiction. It's just a self-evident first principle of thought. You use the laws of logic to discover everything else. Without the laws of logic, you couldn't discover anything. They're just there. I would make the argument they're grounded in God's nature. In fact, there was a great Muslim philosopher a number of years ago who had a fabulous way of showing people who denied the law of non-contradiction that they were wrong. At least he thought it was fabulous. Here's what he said. His name was Avicenna. He said, anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. You can see those are opposites, right? All right, now, that's the law of non-contradiction. I'm here to say that all truth is absolute. Something that is true for all persons at all times in all places. There are no relative truths. You say, I can think of a relative truth. Like what? Like today here in Kalamazoo, I felt cold. It was windy, and it was snowing, and it's spring. What's going on? But the people in Hawaii, they felt warm. That's relative. No, it's not relative at all. It's absolutely true for all people at all times in all places that when referring to you today, you felt cold, if in fact you really did. And it's absolutely true for all people at all times in all places that when referring to the people in Hawaii today, they felt warm, if in fact they really did. Truth is just truth. Now, when you say all truth is absolute, people are going to claim you are very judgmental. In fact, they're going to say things like this. They're going to say, there is no truth. Or they might say, you can't know truth. Or they might say, all truth is relative. Or my favorite, it's true for you, but not for me. Well, Christianity may be true for you, but Buddhism's true for me. Or they might say, no one has the truth. Or probably the cultural favorite is this. You know what? You just ought not judge. Why are you judging? Especially if you're a Christian, they're going to say, Jesus said don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrite? Now, if you can't answer these claims, then obviously you couldn't say the Bible were true. And if you're an atheist, if you can't answer these claims, you couldn't say that, say, the God delusion was true. So there's got to be a problem with these claims. There is. What's the problem with these claims? Yeah, every single one of them violate the law of non-contradiction. That's why we had to express what the law of non-contradiction was here in the beginning. Now, this is your greatest tool in answering these claims. If you don't get anything else out of what we talk about tonight, I don't care whether you're an atheist, a Christian, anywhere in between. If you get this one idea down, it's going to be worth your time. Again, I don't care what your worldview is. This is worth your time. I did not learn this until I was 33 years old in seminary, to show you what a doofus I was. I mean, I knew the law of non-contradiction, but I didn't know how to apply it. After you know how to apply the law of non-contradiction, you're going to save yourself a lot of time. Because so many things out there that you're going to hear are self-contradictory. They can't be true. So here's what you do to figure out that these claims are false. You apply the claim to itself. Apply the claim to itself. Let me give you an example of this. Suppose somebody were to walk in here and say, I can't speak a word in English. What would you say to him? Hey, didn't you just say that in English? Can everyone see that's a self-defeating statement? Yeah. I mean, it's like saying there are no sentences in the English language longer than 3 words. Or it's like saying, here's a practical one, my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that. My son's favorite self-defeating statement is this: Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. After all, he killed Hitler. Think about that. Anyway. So we call this process of turning a claim on itself the Roadrunner tactic, because it reminds us of Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. We unpack this in the book. What's Wile E. Coyote's only mission in life? Catch the Roadrunner and eat him. I don't know why. Roadrunner does not look too tasty. Anyway, as soon as it looks like Coyote's about to grab him, Roadrunner stops short of the cliff. Coyote goes blowing by him, and he's hanging in midair until he realizes he's got no ground to stand on, and he plummets to the valley floor in a heap. That's exactly what you can do when people utter self-defeating statements. You can show them that their claim has no ground to stand on, that it's foundationless. So let's take a look at some of these claims we hear in the culture. This is one of them. There is no truth. If someone were to ever say that to you, what question should you ask them in return? Apply the claim to itself. What would you say? Yeah, simply say, is that true? Is it true that there is no truth? Because if it's true that there is no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true. But it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Now, with this one little tactic, you look like a super genius. All right? You see, you're just turning the claim on itself. Now, by the way, if there's no truth, why is anybody at school? Now, what are you here to do? You're here to learn truth, right? You're paying a lot of money if you're a postmodernist or a relativist to come here. You're not getting anything out of it, apparently, according to your own philosophy, right? There's no truth. Well, what are you doing here? How about there's no such thing as absolute truth? What would you say to somebody who said that? Yeah, you could say, is that an absolute truth? You want to have some fun. You could say, absolutely sure. Once again, you look like a super genius. My favorite one, however, is this. It's true for you, but not for me. If someone says that to you, what should you say to them? You could say that. This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you, but not for me, true for everybody? Because if true for you, but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you, but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, but that's because it's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. True for you, but not for me. Sure, try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go to your bank teller one day and say, look, the economy's down, I need some extra money. I'd like $100,000 out of my account. The bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, I only have $6.14 in your account. Very easy to get the money. You simply say, that's true for you, but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. Are you going to get the money? Or you're going a little fast down Highway 94 out here. You're going 90 in a 55. In fact, we were driving from Detroit today. We probably saw 5 cops in a 20-mile stretch. They're just out there. Suppose they see you going 90. They pull you over. They walk up to your car. They knock on the glass, put the window down. Cop says, you're going 90 in a 55. Easy to get out of a ticket. You simply say, that's true for you, but not for me. And you speed away. He can't give you a ticket if it's not true for you. No, if it's true you were going 90, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to you at that time. Now, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask church members in the beginning of the talk, I'll say, hey, do you believe the Bible is true? And most people will say yes. And then I'll ask them, well, why do you think it's true? Do you know what answer I get more than any other, unfortunately? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not this book is true? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? No, your faith doesn't change a thing about those things. Well, why does the Bible always seem to be talking about faith then? Because there's 2 kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible is true. That's what we call in the Christian world apologetics, giving evidence. But all the belief that in the world won't get you saved according to Christian theology. And in fact, even James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called James, says, even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Why? They don't trust in Him. They intellectually know God exists, but they don't trust in Him. So there's a difference between belief that and belief in. In fact, when I first met my wife, a little over 28 years ago now, I got evidence that she would be a good wife. But all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. See? But that's the difference between belief that and belief in. And if you believe that God exists but you don't trust in Him, that's fine. God won't force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want God now, you won't want Him in eternity. And so when the Bible's talking about faith, most of the time it's talking about the second kind. Not just belief that, but belief in. Once you know that it's true, trust in it. In fact, the better word is trust. Richard Dawkins, the definition you read earlier, is faith is believing something against the evidence. That's not the faith of the Bible. The faith of the Bible is when you know it's true, beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond all doubt, you're not an omniscient being, but enough to make a decision. Once you know it's true, trust in. That's the kind of faith the Bible's talking about. It's not this mindless, blind faith. How about this? You hear this a lot. There is no truth in anything but science. In fact, Richard Dawkins gets awfully close to this. Peter Atkins from Oxford says this. This is called scientism. We get all our truth from science. What's the problem with the claim? Can anyone see it? What would you ask somebody who says this? Yeah, simply say, hey, is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that? No, that's a philosophical claim. You can't go in the laboratory and prove that. And you know what? This is so often overlooked, but you can't do science without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. Science is built on the laws of logic. It's built on the principle of uniformity. It's built on the law of causality. It's built on realism, the idea that we can observe the real world and get accurate information from the real world and then use our reasoning skills to come to some interpretation of the evidence. That's all philosophy. In fact, science is more done in the mind than in the lab. The problem is, if you're not good at philosophy, you may come to bad conclusions. We have an article on our website at crossexamine.org. It's called this, and there's a TV series on this too. It's called Science Doesn't Say Anything, Scientists Do. All data needs to be interpreted, and sometimes the worldview of the scientist will color their interpretation of the evidence. So science literally doesn't say anything, scientists do. And in fact, the debate between the intelligent design people and the Darwinists, you know, it's not a debate over evidence. Everyone's looking at the same evidence. It's not like they're looking at different evidence. You know what's a debate over? It's a debate over philosophy. It's a debate over what causes will we consider possible before we look at the evidence. And then once we look at the evidence, how will we interpret it? That's all philosophy. Get the article. I don't have time to go into too much depth on it right here, but that's a self-defeating statement. How about Immanuel Kant, who said, you can't know the real world? How many have heard of Immanuel Kant? Okay, good portion of us here. That's quite good. Kant's thinking has influenced the way we think in America and across the world, actually. He and David Hume had a great impact on how we think. All modern philosophy goes through Kant. And Kant said, you can't know the real world. Why? Because there's a real world out there, but when the phenomena from the real world gets to your mind categorizes it in such a way that you can't know the real world in itself. You can only know what your mind does to it. Leave it to a philosopher to come up with this. Now, there's just one problem with this philosophy here. What is it? What would you say to Kant, who said you can't know the real world? What question would you ask him? Yeah, simply ask them, then how do you know that about the real world? Why can Kant know about the real world, but we can't? In fact, the relativists and the postmodernists often exempt themselves from their own theories. Notice Kant says you can't know anything about the real world, but he's telling us something about the real world, isn't he? So he's exempting himself from his own theory. How about the skeptical claim, you should doubt everything? Let me ask you guys a question in here. What would you say to somebody who says this, by the way? Yeah, should I doubt that? I mean, why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You notice that? And he who is a skeptic in one set of beliefs is a true believer in another set of beliefs. if you think about that, you'll realize people who are skeptical truly believe in something else. But let me ask you this. I don't care what your worldview is, whether you're Christian, atheist, anywhere in between. How many people in here on occasion doubt what you believe is true? Raise your hand. I got my hand up. Look, I wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and I doubt quite a bit. In fact, it's amazing how often our moods cause us to either doubt or believe. You notice that? Emotional moods, swings. In fact, a friend of mine, Greg Kokel, who does a lot of Christian apologetics, says, before I have my first cup of coffee in the morning, I'm an atheist. After my first cup of coffee, I'm an agnostic. And after my second cup, I'm back to being a Christian. Now, sometimes I'm doubting too, but I realize when I think about my doubts, they're emotional, they're not intellectual. In other words, I look at the evidence is quite strong. Sometimes I'm having a good day, everything's fine. Other days I'm having a bad day, oh, everything's not fine. Another good day, everything's fine. Bad day, not fine. What's changed, me or the evidence? You. Me, I'm changing. I'm going up and down. The evidence is staying the same. And I think the evidence is quite strong. So I realized that when I start doubting, I ought to start doubting my doubts. Because if I start doubting my doubts, then I'm back to knowing something for sure. Have you guys ever thought about doubting your doubts? No. I doubt it. Oh, this is the granddaddy of them all. You ought not judge. You ought not judge. Before we look at what Jesus said about this, what's the problem with the claim logically? Can you see it? If somebody says you ought not judge, what question should you ask them? Yeah, then why are you judging me for judging? See, that's a judgment. Now, what did Jesus say? Did Jesus say don't judge? Because a lot of people think he said don't judge, so we're not supposed to judge. No, Jesus did not say that. In fact, if you look at Matthew chapter 7, where this is recorded, he doesn't just say judge not. What does he say? He says, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying get the problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge, forgive the double negative. It is a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem in your life, get it out of your life first and then go better help your brother. In John 7:24, Jesus says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. Everybody makes judgments. If you're a Christian, you got to make judgments. God exists. Jesus rose from the dead. If you're an atheist, you got to make judgments. God doesn't exist. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Everybody makes judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true? In fact, none of us would be alive right now if we didn't make judgments. You've probably made 100 judgments today between right and wrong, good and evil, safe choices from dangerous choices. Everybody makes judgments. I will say this, though, about Jesus. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They ran Israel. Rome delegated much of the political authority to the Sanhedrin. And Jesus went after these people, and he wasn't always so kind doing it. In fact, how many times have you heard this? People will say, well, that person's such a saint. He's never said a bad word about anyone. You heard that? If that's the definition of a saint, Jesus was no saint. You just need to turn to Matthew chapter 23 to see why. What does Jesus say in Matthew chapter 23 to these religious and political leaders, the Pharisees? Yeah, he says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside, you're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make him a convert, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! For you older people in here, he was not Mr. Rogers. Can you say kindness, boys and girls? Well, he was kind most of the time, but he didn't go around saying, this sermon brought to you by the letter E. No, Jesus was tough. And sometimes we need to be tough. We just need to tell people the truth. And Jesus did that. In fact, if you don't tell people the truth, that's unloving. We think it's unloving in our culture to tell people the truth. It's exactly the opposite. If you care about somebody, you will tell them the truth. Now, we could talk about many more of these self-defeating statements. We don't have time. We've got to get into the God stuff. But this roadrunner tactic is an easy way for you to be a lie detector. A lie detector. Because if you turn a claim on itself, you can see that it's really false. It can't be true. And that reminds me of Homer Simpson, who here is another example of a self-defeating statement. Check this out. Can everybody see that's a self-defeating statement? Okay, very good. Now, the truth about truth. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. You can believe everything's true. Everything can't be true. You can believe the Earth's flat if you want. That won't make it flat. And objective truths can't be denied without being affirmed. Suppose somebody says there are no objective truths. What should you say to them? Use the roadrunner tactic. Turn the claim on itself. Say, is that an objective truth? If they say yes, then they've defeated themselves. If they say no, it's just my subjective opinion. It's just in me. It's in the subject, not some unchangeable object. Then why should I believe it if it's just your opinion? You can't get away from truth. Well, actually, you can get away from it. There is one way to get away from it. You know how you get away from it? Pascal said it very well. He said that people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. The problem isn't with truth, the problem is with us. Paul put it this way, we suppress the truth and unrighteousness to go our own way. A lot of us just believe what we find attractive. We don't have any evidence for it. We just say, well, we like this, so that's what we're going to believe. In fact, this sword cuts both ways. On many college campuses during the Q&A, atheists will have a little exchange, and sometimes if the exchange gets a little bit heated, you'll normally stop and I'll say, do you mind if I ask you a question? Sure, go ahead. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? On several occasions, I've had atheists yell back at me, no! No? Wait, you claim to be an atheist, the beacon of reason. Never mind if atheism's true, reason doesn't exist because we're just molecules in motion, according to Dr. Crick, remember him? So we're not really reasoning, we're just reacting anyway. But let's leave that aside. I ask you, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And you say no? How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't reason. The problem is the will. We don't want it to be true. But as I said, this sword cuts both ways. There's a lot of Christians who just want Christianity to be true. But if you ask them, why is it true? They couldn't give you any real good reason. Thankfully, I think the evidence is good that it is true. But we have to be careful. As the physicist Richard Feynman said, the easiest person to fool is yourself. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe you're wrong about what you believe. Let's see. Let's go a little further. Can we all agree there's truth? I mean, it's self-defeating to say there's no truth. Whether you're an atheist or a Christian, you've got to believe there's truth. So relativism and postmodernism is false if our reasoning is good here. Truth does exist, but now we're going to spend the rest of our time on this key question, does God exist? And we need to describe what we mean by God. What do we mean by God? We're talking here about a theistic God, a God who's beyond the world, who created the world and sustains the world. A theistic God is to the universe what a band is to music. If the band were to stop playing, what would happen to the music? It'd be over. That's what God is to the universe. God isn't just a creator cause and then he leaves the universe. God is a creator cause and then a sustaining cause, like a band is to music. But he's not the band, or I should say he's not the music. Or you could put it this way, it's not as good an analogy, but a theistic God is to the universe as a painter is to a painting. Michelangelo paints the painting. His attributes are expressed in the painting, but Michelangelo's not the painting, right? It's distinct. God is to the universe what a painter is to a painting. The better analogy, I think, is God is to the universe what a band is to music. Now, what do we mean by a theistic God? Let's go a little further. We can put most major world religions into one of three categories. You see the one here on the left? The hands underneath the world, that's what we call theism. God made all. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are the major theistic world religions. The one in the middle, the hand in the world, is pantheism. God is all. Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, and the New Age are pantheistic. You know Zen Buddhism. Use the Force, Luke. The whole Star Wars series is pantheistic. There's not a personal God out there. There's an impersonal force. Everything's God. I'm God, you're God, the grass is God, the trees are God, everything's God. That's pantheism. The last worldview, you just see a world, you don't see a hand at all, is atheism. No God at all. Now, I'm going to give evidence here for theism. Theism, that there's a God beyond the world who created the world and sustains the world. And there are three major arguments we're going to talk about here. There are more than this, but these are the only three we're going to talk about. We cover these in depth in the book. The first is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. It says if there is a beginning to the universe, there must be a beginner. The second is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. If there's design in the universe and design in you, there must be a designer. We'll look at evidence from microscopes and telescopes to figure out if these arguments have good premises behind them. And then the third argument's not scientific at all. It's much more philosophical in nature, but it's the argument we've all understood since we were very small children. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no God, if there is no standard beyond humanity, then that's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. We'll get into that a little bit later. Let's start at the beginning argument, the cosmological argument. And this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, some Christians go, Frank, you know, we're Christians here. We don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is indeed quite good. You even have atheistic scientists admitting the universe had a beginning. Stephen Hawking said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tries to come up with another explanation for how the universe could come into existence out of nothing. I think he fails, but he's admitting the data that the universe had a beginning. Alexander Vilenkin, a cosmologist at Tufts University, said with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, Vilenkin is an agnostic, a believer in the multiverse, that there are many universes out there. But even he says, even if there are other universes out there, the whole show needs an absolute beginning. Now, there's two interesting words he uses in here. The first is the word proof. Normally, scientists say the evidence points to, the evidence suggests. In his view, he thinks it's so strong it constitutes a proof. Again, science doesn't say anything scientists do. This is what he's saying. And then the other interesting word is the word problem. Why is it a problem that there's a cosmic beginning? Because that gets too close to the G word, God. In fact, we're going to see even Albert Einstein himself did what a third grader wouldn't do in math in order to avoid the implication, or in order to avoid the beginning, which would imply that there's a beginner. We'll get there in a minute. What's the evidence that is having these scientists and many others pointing out that the universe had a beginning? This is all from chapter 3 in the book. And it's in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. The S stands for the second law of thermodynamics. In fact, I'm just going to list them now, then we'll go through them very quickly. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. The R stands for the radiation afterglow. The G stands for the great galaxy seeds. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. Let's start with the S, the second law of thermodynamics, which says the universe is running down. It's running out of usable energy. Although in this room, we're not running out of usable energy because it's getting warmer and warmer. Can somebody turn down the heat? I feel like we're getting the remnant heat from the Big Bang right in here, right now. Or open a door or do something. Anyway, must be all the hot air I'm putting out here. Anyway, the universe is running out of usable energy. As time goes on, the amount of energy in the universe, usable energy, is going down. And pretty soon we're going to be out of energy completely. You say, well, how does this show the universe had a beginning? Well, think of a flashlight. Suppose I were to take a flashlight right here, turn it on, put it on this desk, and we were to leave and come back tomorrow. What would be the strength of the beam coming out of the flashlight tomorrow, do you think? It would be weak, if not completely dead. Why? Because there's only so much energy in those batteries. And the longer the flashlight is on, the less and less energy those batteries are going to have. What would the strength of the beam coming out of the flashlight be right now if this flashlight was on from all eternity? There'd be no light, right? Well, apply this to the universe. Imagine the universe has batteries in it. If the universe has been in existence for eternity, we'd have run out of energy by now. But we still have energy. The sun is still burning, which is telling us what? The universe had a beginning. By the way, this is also called the law of entropy, the law of disorder. Things go to disorder with time. Things wear out. You run out of gas in your car. That's the second law of thermodynamics. The paint peels off your house. That's the second law of thermodynamics. You wear out the carpet. That's the second law of thermodynamics. In fact, nature will take a building and turn it into a pile of bricks, but nature will never take a pile of bricks and turn it into a building. Okay? Things go to disorder left to themselves. Since we still have order right now, the universe must have had a beginning, because if it didn't have a beginning, we'd be out of all order right now. We'd be in complete disorder. Now, the U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Does anyone know who this guy is right here? It's Edwin Hubble. For some reason, back in the 1930s, they thought it was cool to have your picture taken with a pipe. We know he has a telescope named after him now that's circling the Earth, but this was a telescope he was using at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, California in 1929. In 1929, he's looking out of his telescope and he notices that all these galaxies are moving away from us. And he knew that because there was a red shift in the light. If the galaxies were moving toward us, they would have been blue. And Hubble deduced that this is what the universe is doing. And he deduced that if you go all the way back in time, everything collapses back to a point where mathematically space, matter, and time go to zero. So the universe came out of nothing. Once there was nothing, and then suddenly the universe leapt into existence. That has implications we'll talk about a little later. In the 1940s, scientists thought, well, if the universe had a beginning out of a single point, it probably had a beginning in a great explosion. But nobody bothered to look for the remnant heat from the great explosion until two scientists discovered it by accident, working at Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey. That's Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias. That's the R in surge, the radiation afterglow. What they found was the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. It's still out there. It's just a couple of degrees above absolute zero, but they found it by means of that antenna behind them. They won Nobel Prizes in physics. Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer, said this has convinced the last doubting Thomas in what at that point had been the dominant view of the origin of the universe. They thought the universe was eternal. It was called the steady state theory. He said after this discovery, literally the smoking gun to the Big Bang, you can't believe in the steady state anymore. Now, scientists thought there should be very fine temperature variations in the radiation afterglow that allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. They were going to try and measure these temperature variations, but they couldn't measure them from Earth. At least they didn't think they could. So they're going to put them up on a satellite. Actually, they're going to put the satellite up on the space shuttle in the 1980s. Unfortunately, the Challenger exploded off the launching pad in 1986, so they had no way of getting the satellite up into orbit. So they redesigned the entire satellite. They made it half its original size. They put it up on a rocket and put it into orbit in 1989. The satellite was called COBE, Cosmic Background Explorer. It circled the Earth for 3 years taking measurements. In 1992, they announced their results. What they found were temperature variations that were so precise, they were down to 1 part in 100,000. The leader of the expedition, this man, George Smoot, who taught at UCal Berkeley, said that we found the machining marks of the Creator. He said if you're religious, it's like looking at God. That was the headline in a May edition of Time magazine in 1992. Now, you may have heard last week scientists looked further at this radiation afterglow, these ripples in the radiation afterglow, these very fine temperature variations, and think they've discovered there was a very brief period of inflation in the very, very early universe. and they detected that through these temperature variations. So they're still looking at this. Now, they detected that apparently from the South Pole, whereas this was a satellite. The E in SURGE stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. And Einstein knew back in about 1915 that space, matter, and time were correlative, that they came into existence together. But Einstein didn't like that. In fact, he called the result irritating. Irritating? Why would it be irritating? He did not want a beginning to the universe. So you know what the great Einstein did in order to avoid a beginning to the universe? He put a fudge factor into his equations called the cosmological constant. He did not want an expanding universe. He wanted a counter effect to gravity. He wanted a steady state universe, a static and eternal universe. So the great Einstein, in order to do this, divided by 0. Now what are you told in 3rd grade? Never divide by 0. You can go straight to hell for that. Well, the great Einstein divided by 0. Mathematicians in the 1920s are looking at his equations going, Al, you've got a mathematical error in here. You can't divide by 0. Then in 1929, Hubble looks through his telescope, and he sees the expanding universe that the theory of general relativity predicted. And he called Einstein, and he said, Al, or Dr. Einstein, he said, what you predicted by your theory in 1915, I'm seeing through my telescope now here at Mount Wilson. Why don't you come out here to California, and you can look through the telescope yourself and see the redshift in the light, see that the universe is expanding. So in 1931, Einstein went out to Mount Wilson and he looked through Hubble's telescope. In fact, who's that right behind him? That's Hubble. See the pipe? There it is. After Einstein looked through the telescope, at some point later he said, I now see the necessity of a beginning. The universe did have a beginning. All I'm interested now is to find the mind of God. The rest are details. Now, Einstein was not a Christian. He denied being an atheist. He also denied being a pantheist. So nobody really knows what Einstein was. He may have been like a deist, somebody who thought that God set up the universe and then left it. But his theory of general relativity is continually verified by all sorts of different methods. In fact, he's so sure that the universe had a beginning that if Einstein were here today and you were to say, Al, I don't think the universe had a beginning, you know what he'd probably do? He'd probably do this. Because it did have a beginning. Now this led this man, Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer, who sat in the same chair Edwin Hubble sat in until he died about 6 years ago at the age of 82. He was at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena. He wrote a book, Jastrow did, called God and the Astronomers. On page 1 of the book, he says, I'm an agnostic on religious matters. In other words, he goes, look, I don't know whether God exists or not. But then he writes on page 14, the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. He then went on in an interview to say this, and by the way, that's an actual picture of Saturn in infrared. That's not a painting. That's Saturn in infrared from the Hubble Space Telescope. Here's what he said in an interview. Astronomers now found they painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth, and they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Wait, why would an agnostic say it's scientifically proven that supernatural forces are at work? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Why not? Because nature was created. Nature can't be the cause because it was the effect. All nature was created. There was no nature. There was nothing. No space, no matter, no time. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. No space, no matter, no time. Now, it wasn't just Jastrow who said these kind of things. These are all Nobel Prize winners in physics that helped discover the surge evidence. Arno Penzias. The best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. His colleague, Robert Wilson, said, certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. George Smoot, who said if you're religious, it's like looking at God, when he was looking at the great galaxy seeds, said, there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. Now that's the scientific evidence that is having scientists, astronomers, cosmologists saying, look, the universe had a beginning. But let's suppose all that science is wrong. There's a philosophical reason to at least believe time had a beginning. Why? Here's the timeline. Let's say we don't know when this timeline began, but here's today, right? There is yesterday on the timeline, the day before yesterday, there's last week. Question, can this timeline be infinite? How? How can it be infinite? Can you be at the end of an infinite? No, by definition, you can't be at the end of an infinite, can you? And can you add anything to an infinite? No, an infinite, by definition, is everything. You can't add anything to it. But tomorrow, we're going to add another day to this timeline. And the day after that, we'll add another day and another day and another day. So no matter how far back this timeline goes, it must have had a beginning. Well, how do we know? Well, today never would have gotten here if there were an infinite number of moments before today. Why? Because you'd always have to live another day before you got to today if there's an infinite number of moments between whenever the timeline began and today. If there's an infinite number, the bottom line here, I know this is kind of hard to conceptualize, but if the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. So there has to be a beginning at some point to time. I know if you think about that long enough, that definitely gives you intellectual constipation. But the New Testament, interestingly enough, on I think 4 occasions talks about time having a beginning. So time itself had a beginning. If it didn't have a beginning, today never would have arrived. Now, if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following 2 options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, my only question is, which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? Seems to me someone. Now, I was at Texas A&M, and one atheist said, oh, no, I think number 1 is more reasonable. I said, number 1, hold on, let's take a look at number 2. Number 2 says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that is a miracle, but at least you got a miracle worker, right? You've got someone doing the miracle. Number 1 is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. I mean, that doesn't seem to make any sense. I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, which, by the way, the law of causality does not say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause. There has to be an unmoved mover. There has to be a cause whose essence equals his existence. In other words, a cause that isn't caused by anything else, the being that just is. An unmoved mover, an uncreated creator. But everything else that had a beginning needs a cause. I said to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality and that things don't pop into existence out of nothing without a cause. There is nobody sitting in this auditorium right now that as you sit here, you are worried that a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing in your dorm room and is currently defecating on the carpet. You don't worry about that, right? You don't worry as we sit here right now that a raging rhinoceros is going to appear right here and charge into the audience and maul you. No, that doesn't happen. When things come into existence, they have to have a cause. And the universe came into existence. And look, if things can pop into existence out of nothing by nothing, why doesn't everything pop into existence out of nothing by nothing? Why don't Mercedes-Benzes and MacBook Pros pop into existence? Could have saved me a couple of grand. In fact, after this seminar, if you go home tonight and you're hungry for a pizza, should you order one or should you just wait and hope? I think it makes more sense to order one, don't you think? It's not going to pop into existence out of nothing. It needs a cause. In fact, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, why does anything exist if there's no God, if there's no uncaused first cause? So, how do atheists respond to this evidence? Well, the most popular theory right now is the multiverse, which is really responding to an argument I'm about to get to. But But it says there are a lot of universes out here. And in fact, here is National Geographic's kind of graphic for this. It says multiple universes grow like branches from a tree trunk in a model that allows the universe to create itself. Hello, McFly. Can you create yourself? No, you can't. You got to exist prior to creating anything. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to let some graphic artist down at National Geographic draw some sort of demented French horn to get me to believe that's how we got here. One scientist in the article was very honest. He said, it's sort of like we're brushing our ignorance under the rug of the very early universe. This led Robert Jastrow, again, the agnostic astronomer who wrote the book God and the Astronomers, after he goes through much of this surge evidence that had been discovered to that point. He goes through the entire book. He goes through all this evidence, and he gets to the last line of the book. And here's what he says. This is the last line. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He's scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1. The best explanation for the beginning of the universe is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If space, matter, and time had a beginning, the cause can't be made of space, matter, and time. The cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, and also powerful to create the universe out of nothing. That's what we mean by God. We'll cover that in a few minutes after we do these other two arguments, but let's take a look at the second argument now, called the design argument, or teleological argument, telos, a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe, there must be a designer. Now, we're going to look at what is often called the fine-tuning of the universe. The fine-tuning of the universe. The universe just didn't explode into being out of nothing. Sporadically, it exploded into being with extreme precision. Such precision that if anything were slightly different, the universe wouldn't be here, the galaxies wouldn't form, certainly life wouldn't be here. Even Stephen Hawking, the atheist, admits this. He says that if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. In other words, you change the expansion rate that infinitesimal amount at the very beginning, we wouldn't be here. Now, this is an initial condition of the universe. You can't make some sort of evolutionary argument here. This was the initial creation condition. And by the way, the expansion rate right now is highly fine-tuned for life to exist. The gravitational force is precisely fine-tuned. If the gravitational force were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40, we wouldn't be here. Now, what's 1 part in 10 to the 40? This is a hard number to get your head around, so let me give you an illustration. First of all, it means 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. Let's take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. Now, that's a long way, right? Take a particular inch mark on that tape measure and set gravity right there. Now, I realize gravity is not measured in inches. This is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction over a scale as wide as the entire universe, we wouldn't be here. That's 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. There's only 3 possible explanations for that value being right where it is. Physical necessity, it had to be there. No, didn't have to be there. Could have been here, could have been here, could have been a million miles that way. Chance, it just so happened to fall there. I don't have enough faith to believe in that. In fact, chance isn't really a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. There's not a cause out there known as chance. So when scientists use the word chance, quite frequently what they mean is we don't really know, unless they're using a mathematical probability here, we don't really know what caused it. It's just chance it turned out that way. Chance is often used to cover our ignorance. The third possibility after physical necessity and chance is design. Somebody intended to put it right there. That seems like the best explanation to me. The same being that created the universe is the same being that designed it to be the way it is. In fact, Arno Penzias put it this way. He said, astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. He discovered the R in surge, the radiation afterglow. In fact, there's even a habitability argument you can make here. Where are we in the solar system? There we are, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to, or a little bit further away, we wouldn't be here. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It is not too hot. It is not too cold. It is just right. Although in the winter, it's not just right here. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, just right. Change that slightly, we wouldn't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we wouldn't be here. Why not? What does Jupiter do for us? Yes, it protects us from asteroids because its gravitational force is so strong, it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you see what these purple marks are? You know what those are? Those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, I saw in the Drudge Report about a year ago, it said, there was a headline, it said, scientists think major meteor to hit Earth in 2040. I am rooting for Jupiter. In fact, you want to see the size of Jupiter? There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination.
Yes!
Take a look at this. There's Earth. You can hardly see Pluto. All right, take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. There's the sun right here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto? Forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus. You got Arcturus right here? Now take a look at this. Where's Arcturus? Right there. To the left of the white star Rigel. That's Antares, another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto. Forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. There's another principle that says that the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. All that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth in the life-supporting position. If the distances were different, gravitational forces would be interrupted and we couldn't stay in orbit, therefore we couldn't have life. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. That is, if the gas pedal doesn't stick. Now, I was at the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona a number of years ago, and if you're ever permitted to go to Tucson, if you can go out to the Desert Museum at night, it's far from the city lights, and on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. And we were out there one night, this is maybe 15 years ago, and the guide had us out there, and he said, look, if we look up at 9:03, it's so clear tonight, we're going to see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on. We're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, whoop! And we look up in the sky, out of the west. There's an object streaking out of the west, about 70 degrees above the horizon, relative to us, about like this. I mean, it is really cooking. When it got right here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. But it was just cruising across the sky. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact we were in complete darkness, the space shuttle was so high up, the sun was still reflecting off it. And when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle is in orbit, the space shuttle is traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. Right, you'll be here. 5 miles a second. Think about that. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. How long would it take us, in other words, to go 30 trillion miles at 5 miles a second? How long do you think it would take us? Anyone? A number of years, yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That's just to go from our star to another star in our galaxy. Now, that's not to go outside the galaxy. That's just inside our galaxy. 201,450 years at 5 miles a second. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. Who'd like to go to the next nearest star? We'll go get in, kids. How much longer, Dad? Another 200,000 years. Play some more Xbox. Think about that. That's incredible. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. The heavens are awesome. And how many stars are out there?
Billions.
Billions. Who are you, Carl Sagan? Billions and billions. Well, he's right. There were billions. Billions and billions. You know how many stars are out there? This is an estimate. But the number of stars out there are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. In fact, you see this from the left. This is from the ground. You see that square right there? That's this square from the Hubble Space Telescope. Those are galaxies, stars, heavenly bodies. The heavens are awesome. February 1st, 2003, President Bush goes into the East Room of the White House. It's Saturday morning at 9 a.m. They turn the TV camera on. Every major network carries his address. Saturday morning at 9 a.m., why? The president looks into the camera and says, "My fellow Americans, this morning our country experienced a great tragedy. Upon re-entry into the atmosphere, the space shuttle Columbia burned up in the skies over Texas. There are no survivors. The Columbia is lost." The president then went on to quote from Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 25. Why Isaiah chapter 40? Because in Isaiah chapter 40, God is speaking, according to Isaiah. And what does God say? "To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One." In other words, you want to know what I'm like? Here's a comparison. Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these stars and named them one by one? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The president looked back in the camera and said, "The same God that created and named all those stars is the same God that created and knows the names of the 7 astronauts who perished today. While they did not return safely home to us, we can all now pray they've all returned safely home." Do you want to know who God is like? Most Christians have the wrong idea of who God is like. We think God is a big angel. God is not a big angel. You want to know what God is like? Remove all limits from your mind. That's God. If he's an ounce of any attribute, he's infinite in that attribute. An ounce of love, infinite love. Ounce of justice, infinite justice. Ounce of power, infinite power. He is the standard by which everything else is measured. Why is there a second commandment? At least one reason why is there a second commandment. Thou shalt make no graven image. Because any image you make of an infinite being necessarily limits his majesty. You can't draw a picture of infinity. Every picture you draw is finite, it's limited, it's restricted. God is infinite, unlimited, unrestricted. The reason the Bible keeps saying, look to the heavens to get an idea of the nature of God is because the closest thing in our experience to infinity, even though it's still a finite thing, are the heavens. The psalmist says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Paul says, his invisible qualities are clearly seen from what has been made. The psalmist in Psalm 103 says, God's love to those that fear him exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth. How high are the heavens above the earth? Number of stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. Infinite from our perspective. That's the point. Not only can you look at the universe and see it appears designed, you can look in at life and see it looks designed as well. In fact, let's go from the telescope to the microscope. Let's go back to the first one-celled creature. This is an amoeba, something like it the Darwinists say we all evolved from. You heard of the theory of macroevolution, from the goo to you via the zoo? Okay, this is the goo. Or from the infantile to the reptile to the crocodile to the gentile. Okay, this is the infantile right here. Now, notice, here's an important observation. It doesn't say made by God or made by natural forces on it. So how do you know where it came from? You have to use forensic principles and try and discover how this particular one-celled amoeba originated. And in order to do that, you've got to look inside the cell. Darwin didn't have the capacity to do this. Now we do have the capacity to do this. And when we look inside the cell, we see something Darwin never dreamed about. In fact, in order to show you this, I got to take you to your breakfast table. How many people here like alphabet cereal? Anyone like alphabet cereal? All right, let's suppose you're a teenager. You want to have a bowl of alphabet cereal. You come downstairs one morning to have a bowl. You see the box is knocked over on the table, and right in the middle of the table, the letters spell, take out the garbage, Mom. What are you going to assume? The cat knocked the box over? Earthquake shook the house? No, you're going to say that's intelligent design from an intelligent being, Mom. Or let's say you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, John loves Mary. What do you assume? Crabs came out of the water and made that message? Waves did that? No, you're going to say that had to be the product of intelligence, because you know in all your prior experience that messages only come from minds. Well, if that's the case, where does this message come from? DNA, the 4-letter genetic alphabet that every living thing has. You have DNA, I have DNA, a banana has DNA. And this message in you, in every one of your cells, is about 3.5 billion letters long. All the letters are in the right order, save a rare error or so. How did that get here? Where did this code come from? And what is this thing? Bill Gates put it well. He said DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Where do codes come from? They come from coders. Where do programs come from? They come from programmers. So where does DNA come from? What we're saying here is DNA is a message. It's like take out the garbage, Mom. It's just a lot longer. And the question is, how much DNA was in the first one-celled amoeba or something like it? Well, before I tell you, how big is an amoeba? An amoeba, you could line up several hundred amoebas in an inch. And in each one of them, you've got 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia worth of DNA in that amoeba, in each amoeba. It seems to me that life requires an intelligent cause. In fact, to believe that that resulted by natural forces is like believing that the Western Michigan University Library resulted from an explosion in a printing shop. You see, I don't have enough faith to believe that. You say, well, how do you even know this is true? Who told you there's that much information in a one-celled creature? Some Christian? No. You know who told me this? Richard Dawkins, the great atheist. who, in his book Blind Watchmaker, admits this. Now, some atheists will say, oh, Frank, you're making a God of the gaps argument. What's a God of the gaps argument? You're plugging God in to say that he created life when someday we're going to find a natural cause for it, and you're going to look stupid for saying it was God. This is not a God of the gaps argument. Why? Because we don't just lack a natural explanation for this. I mean, when you see take out the garbage mom on your table, you don't just lack a natural explanation. You have positive, empirically verifiable evidence for an intelligent being. So we're not arguing from what we don't know, we're arguing from what we do know. When we see codes, we think a coder. When we see a program, we think a programmer. When we see a message, we think of a mind that created the message. So we're arguing from what we do know, not arguing from what we don't know. Now, I wish we had more time to talk about you biologically, but we don't. I just got a minute or two here to talk about it. In fact, this was all of us at one point in the womb. This is in the womb at 11 weeks. Question: is that animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? That's human. In fact, let's go back before this. Let's go back all the way to when your mother and your father got together. Have you guys had this talk before? I'll try and be discreet. I see some young people. When your mother and father got together, your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won! Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were! Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the genetic information that makes you you. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the genetic information that makes you you. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. Do you know you have not received any more genetic information from that point till right now? Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there's only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. Now, from that point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place with no conscious input from you or your mother. Your cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells. Other cells became heart cells. Other cells became lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells became what they needed to become by walking across your entire body, so to speak, that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off! How do you know how to do this? There's a sustaining cause. That's why. There's a sustaining cause right now that with no conscious input from you that is causing this to occur. I don't have enough faith to believe there's not intelligence behind life. There is. All right, let's get to the moral argument and then get to your questions here. The first 2 arguments had scientific evidence behind them. This one does not. It's more philosophical in nature. In April of 1945, the Nazis liberated the Buchenwald concentration camp. The Nazis liberated it. The Americans liberated it. The Allies liberated it, the Nazi camp, in April of 1945. They walked through the front gate, which is still there. They looked to the right. They saw the crematorium off in the distance, which is still there. When they got down to the crematorium, they looked into the courtyard attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. Now, if there is no God, then this was just a matter of opinion. This is just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. You don't think you ought to murder Jews, Hitler says you ought to. If there's no standard beyond humanity, then that's just a matter of opinion. Everyone in this room intuitively understands this is morally wrong. Not just your opinion, but it's really wrong. If that's the case, there must be an unchanging, authoritative, objective moral standard out there, which is exactly what we mean by God. In fact, how can you discover who's right and who's wrong? Mother Teresa, of course, the Catholic nun who devoted her life to serving the poor in Calcutta, India, and Adolf Hitler, the Nazi leader who murdered millions of people. How can you discover who's right and who's wrong? Well, let me ask you this question. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? What would you need to see in order to know which map of Scotland were better? What would you need to see? A what? A standard. What standard would that be? That would be the real unchanging place called Scotland, right? I mean, if Scotland doesn't exist, then these two maps are meaningless. But if Scotland does exist, then we can see map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, we have a standard to measure these two maps by, to discover which one is closer to the true, to the standard. That's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And we say Mother Teresa measured up to the standard better than did Hitler. If the standard didn't exist, there'd be no way to adjudicate between Mother Teresa and Hitler. Now, what is the standard? That's God's unchanging nature. Look, if there is no God, then the Nazis were not wrong. I was at Michigan State a few years ago. Oh, we have Michigan State fans at Western Michigan University? It's just one. Okay. Well, you're not going to be a fan after this story. Because I was at Michigan State, and there were a couple atheists sitting on this side of the room, and during the Q&A we got talking about morality, and one of them, I said, well, you're an atheist. What's your standard of morality? And he said, whatever the majority decides is morally right. I said, are you telling me that if you lived in Nazi Germany and the majority decided to murder Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, and Jehovah's Witnesses, and anybody else they thought was undesirable, that that would be morally right? And he paused, and he blushed, and he said, yes. And his atheist buddy right next to him looked at him and literally yelled, no! The first atheist knew in his heart the answer was no, but in order to be consistent with his atheism, he had to say yes. But of course, on atheism, there is no standard. Majority, minority, it turns out from a pragmatic perspective, whoever has the most power gets to impose his or her will on everybody else. Nobody has any rights. In fact, if there is no God, love is no better than rape. Not in an objective way. We may not like it, but it's not objectively wrong. And there are no human rights. Everybody in this room, no matter what your worldview is, you believe there are objective moral rights, human rights. That maybe we have the freedom of religion or the freedom of speech or the right to life at least. That people ought not kill you. You believe that. If there's no God, that doesn't really exist. That's just your opinion. If there is no God, religious crusades are not wrong. Christopher Hitchens, during our debates, would always say, well, you know, you religious people have done evil things through the crusades. And I'd say, well, you're absolutely right. But on atheism, why is that wrong? If there's no God, why not murder everybody to get what you want? By the way, you can watch both of our debates with Hitchens, who was brilliant, by the way. I mean, I loved Hitchens because he was so witty, he had the British accent. In fact, during the debates, I was listening to him going, I like this guy. You know, he's fun to listen to. And he didn't really have arguments, though. He had complaints. He had complaints about the way God was doing things. Also, tolerance is no better than intolerance if there is no God. By the way, are Christians called to be tolerant? No. Christians are called to be loving. Tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And sometimes, in order to love people, you can't tolerate what they're doing because they're hurting themselves and others. We know this as parents. We don't let our kids do anything. That wouldn't be loving. Finally, you can't complain about the problem of evil if there is no God. In fact, C.S. Lewis thought that the problem of evil disproved God for many years. And he said there was too much injustice in the world for there to be a good God. And then he had an epiphany one day. He ultimately wound up writing in Mere Christianity that epiphany. Here was his thought. He says, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, if you don't know what justice is, you can't know what injustice is. And if there is no standard of justice that doesn't change, then there's nothing unjust about it. In order for something to be not right, something has to be right. And for something to be right, it can't just be your opinion or my opinion. It has to be in an unchanging, authoritative source. The shadows prove the sunshine. That's another way of putting it. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. You can't have shadows without sunshine. So the shadows prove the sunshine. That's another C.S. Lewis line. That's the way we know. I mean, if there's evil in the world, God exists. Why? Because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. So evil does not disprove God. It may prove there's a devil out there, but it does not disprove God. So, let me be clear what we are saying and what we are not saying. We are not saying, theists are not saying that atheists can't be moral. They can. We are not saying that atheists don't know morality. They do. Do you need the Bible to know right from wrong? The answer is no. The Bible may give you more detail on certain things, but everybody already intuitively understands right from wrong. In fact, that's what the Bible teaches. It's written on your hearts, Romans chapter 2. Everybody intuitively knows right and wrong on the basics. So it's not that atheists can't be moral. They can. It's not that atheists don't know morality. They do. What we are saying is that atheists can't justify morality. Knowing what's right does not explain why the standard of rightness exists. And this is the biggest mistake made in this argument. Atheists confuse what is known as epistemology with ontology. What's epistemology? That's how you know something. Ontology is the study of being. Does it actually exist? You may come to know the moral law in many different ways. Your mother may have taught it to you. It may be written on your heart. Society may have taught it to you. But that doesn't explain why something is right or wrong. Why is there a standard of rightness to begin with? In fact, we can put it this way. You can know what's in a book and deny there is an author, but there would be no book to know unless there was an author. Does everyone agree with that? I mean, you can read a book and say, nobody wrote this, and you can still understand what's in the book. But obviously, there's got to be an author if there is a book to know. Same thing is true with the moral law. Atheists can know what's right and deny God, but there would be no right without God. Of course you can know right from wrong and not believe in God. You just can't justify it. You just can't say why rightness is there. So when Christopher Hitchens wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, first of all, notice this word poisons. That's a fun way of saying that religion is evil. But of course, he doesn't have good and evil in his worldview. He's a molecular machine, so where is he coming up with poisons and evil? And also, notice that religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion. I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. In fact, in the second debate with Hitchens, and by the way, you can see them both on our website for free, crossexamined.org. In the second debate, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to this book. But if I could, I wouldn't need a Savior. If I was perfect, I wouldn't need Jesus. So when you bring up all the evil things that we've done, you're basically proving our worldview. We do need a Savior. In fact, when people say I can't go to church because there's all these hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. Of course we're all hypocrites. That's what the church is. It's a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. We're not perfect. We need Jesus. We need one another. Now, if you look at Hitchens, who I said was brilliant, he had complaints. He did not have really good arguments against God. When you read his book, a lot of what he says in his book is true, but it's just complaints about what religious people have done and complains about the way God is running the universe, and he comes across as really angry. He's just angry, which is why I ended both debates by saying, you can sum up Christopher Hitchens' book in one sentence. Here it is. There is no God, and I hate him. Now, tragically, Hitchens died a couple of years ago. I emailed him about 3 weeks before he died. Of course, I didn't know he was about to die. I knew he was sick, and I emailed him. I said, Christopher, I know some doctors at Sloan Kettering in New York. If they can help you, let me know. I'll connect you with them. And he emailed me back, and he said, I'd like to renew our debates. I said, well, maybe he's getting better. So I emailed him back. You want me to set something up? He said, no, I'm not quite ready yet. 2.5 weeks later, he was dead. Tragic. Let's sum this up, get to your questions. Remember I said from these three arguments, we're going to try and show there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator out there. From these three arguments, I think we can do that. From the cosmological argument, we can see that we have an immaterial, timeless, and spaceless being. Why? Because material, time, and space were created, so the cause can't be made of material, time, and space. We can also see this being is extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. Do you realize everything we create out of pre-existing material? God creates out of nothing. Also, from the design argument, we can see he's extremely intelligent. He put this universe together with extreme precision. He also has purpose. We're here for a reason. From the moral argument, we can see he's absolutely morally perfect. And we can also see that he's personal. How do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. When you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. We also know, by the way, that this being is personal from the cosmological argument. You say, how so? Because in order to go from a state of nothingness to a state of existence, someone had to make a choice. And only persons make choices. Gravity doesn't make choices. Gravity doesn't go, look, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground. Right? Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. Which is why when you read a book like Stephen Hawking's The Grand Design, on page 181, remember Stephen Hawking admits the universe had a beginning. On page 181, he says this, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. The what? How does gravity create anything? First of all, gravity didn't exist when there was nothing. And secondly, gravity doesn't make choices. Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. Given a state of conditions, it just does the same thing. It's not a creative force. So even when brilliant scientists state nonsense, it's still nonsense. So we have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, purposeful, morally perfect, personal creator. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't opened the Bible yet we have the attributes of the God of the Bible. Now, does this mean that the God of the Bible necessarily exists? No. Why not? All we've proven at this point, if our reasoning is good and our evidence is good, is that theism is true. What does that mean about pantheism and atheism? Well, they can't be true, right? Law of non-contradiction. The question is, which one of these theisms is true? Is it Judaism, Christianity, or Islam? Maybe they just have theism right, maybe nothing else. But if God does exist, if a theistic God does exist, and he does want to tell us which one of these is true, what could he do? He could do only what he could do, and that would be point 3, a miracle. Now, I don't have time to go into miracles in depth, but let me just say one thing about miracles. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? People always say the resurrection. That's a biggie, but it's an easy miracle compared to the greatest. What? Yes, the greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is believable. I mean, if it is true that God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the heavens and the earth? Well, of course. If he can create the whole universe out of nothing, can he make axe heads float in water? Of course. Can he raise Jesus from the dead? Of course. Can he part the Red Sea? Of course. Can he do the Jonah miracle? Easy. I don't know, people get all wrapped around the axle about Jonah. I'm going, what's the big deal? God can create the universe out of nothing. He can do whatever he wants with a fish and a guy. Right? There's no problem here. Now, the thing is that we have good evidence that the first verse of the Bible is indeed true. that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. If that's the case, every other verse is at least believable. Now, one other thing. You may have heard me say God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. Some of you are probably thinking, I thought God can do anything. No, there's even some things God can't do. He can't do logically impossible things. Like what? Like he can't create a square circle. No such thing. He can't create a one-ended stick. No such thing. He can't create a married bachelor. No such thing. He can't create an honest politician. Okay? There's some things that are just too hard for God. All right? But there's more, and there's more in the book. But we need to end where we began. Remember we started with Francis Crick? Remember his astonishing hypothesis? That you, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Can anyone see the problem with this claim? Use the Roadrunner tactic. Go back to it. What's the problem with it? Exactly. Why should we believe what he says when he's just a machine? I mean, imagine if Crick had written this. Imagine if he had said the astonishing hypothesis is that my scientific conclusions that I write in this book are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Would anybody believe anything he says? You see, this is why for me, materialistic atheism is ultimately self-defeating. You shouldn't believe anything you think. In fact, just about 10 days or so ago, I had a debate in Denmark, which you can see on our website. I debated an anthropologist by the name of Dennis Normark. And I went through this argument, and he had never heard it before. I said, look, if you're just a meat machine, then why should I believe anything you think? If I'm just a meat machine, why should I believe anything I think? We're cells. We have souls. We make choices. We have free will. We can reason. That can't be explained on atheistic materialism. Look, Christianity might not be true. You may look at the evidence and go, I don't think it's true. But I'm telling you, one thing that can't be true is materialistic atheism. There's no way you could know it. I mean, it could be true. You just couldn't know it. I mean, I'm more certain that atheism is false than I am that Christianity is true. Just for this very reason right here. Now, what's the purpose of your life? Well, it's not a glorified Monopoly game. You're going to have to come to part 2. Because we'll get into it then. And the book and the DVDs are in the back, by the way, if you want to get a book or a DVD from my friend Rick back there. Also, if you sign up for our email on our website, you'll get one email from us a month that will give you a little article on apologetics and hopefully help you in defending the faith if you're a Christian, or annoy you if you're an atheist. We're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we are so into social media, we've combined YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook into our own social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Okay? So you may want to sign up for that. We're on radio every Saturdays, and we're also on DirecTV Wednesday and Saturdays, and you got to get the Cross-Examined app. Go to our website or go to the App Store, download the app. It works on Droid devices and Apple devices. All our podcasts are up there, and so is a quick answer section. Much of the stuff we went through today is on the app. So if you get the app and it's free, much of what we went through you can access at any point you want. And we're updating it all the time. We've only had it out for about 6 months. It already has over 22,000 downloads. So check it out. People seem to like it. The Cross-Examined app. All right. I want to thank everybody for coming before we get to questions. And I also want to turn it over to Joel for just a minute, because he's going to tell you about how we're going to do Q&A. And Joel, before we get into that, tell everybody in here if they want to go deeper into some of these topics that they can do it right here on campus. When do you guys meet? Who are you? When do you meet? And go through all that.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let's give Dr. Turek a round of applause. And if you're interested in discussing this more, we do have a club named Ratio Christi. We meet Tuesday nights, 7 to 9, in Moore Hall. We have more information in the back. We'd love to hang out and talk more about this stuff. We will be entering into a time of Q&A. And Anyone is allowed to ask a question, but please let it be a question that is relevant to Dr. Turek's presentation, and also please keep it relatively short in the interest of allowing other people to ask questions. Again, if you want to have more conversation on this, I'm sure you can hang out afterwards or come to club. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a line here. So if you have a question, you can come please get in line and ask your question. So come on forward.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. What's your name?
My name's John. We've actually talked before about 4 years ago.
Oh, all right. How you doing? Are you still a student here?
I'm a master's student, actually.
Oh, all right. What are you majoring in?
Biology.
Cool.
All right. See, I don't think you proved your point that the creator's personal.
I'm sorry?
I don't think you proved that the creator's personal. That your God, or that the thing that created the universe was personal.
Okay, why not? Why do you think not?
Let me just quote William Lane Craig. I think you know him. I think every Christian here probably does. This is in response to the idea of quantum vacuuming, that particles appear without any cause. He says, if a causal condition is sufficient for the phenomenon will happen. Therefore, or causally sufficient. So he's saying that there is still a cause because there's a causally sufficient matrix for this to happen within.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I'd have to unpack what he meant by that.
Well,
but
he's saying like
just because you have a sufficient condition doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have a cause. Well, for example, you might have leaves and you might even have a match, but if you never get the two together, you're not going to have a fire, right?
Well, he goes on to say that it's like water at freezing. That there is no personal cause to it. It's just that that it meets the criteria for frozen waters at the temperature 0 degrees.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's his response to the idea of that quantum vacuums can create particles which could go on to create the universe. Would you? Now, my problem.
Okay. Hang on, John. That's a good question. The quantum vacuum question. And as you know, Dr. Craig deals with that question quite a bit on the quantum vacuum.
Well, I'm going to relent the point that could be true. That if something is sufficient for something to happen, it can happen.
Okay. The problem is, let me just deal with the quantum issue because it's a good objection to bring up because many atheists, of course, bring it up that there's a quantum vacuum out there. But first of all, at the quantum level, subatomic particles do not come into being out of nothing, non-being. The subatomic vacuum is comprised of fluctuating energy. So it's not nothing. It still is something. The question is, what created the quantum vacuum? And Lawrence Krauss's book, which talks about a universe from nothing, he equivocates on what the word nothing means. In fact, even an atheist from Columbia University pointed that out to him in the New York Times, which really frosted Dr. Krauss. But he was pointing out that the subatomic realm is not nothing. It still needs to be created. So even if there is a subatomic realm and there are these apparent uncaused causes or uncaused effects coming out of it, does not mean that the universe could be one of those causes because it still would require the cause of the subatomic realm. Also, it's highly speculative. There are at least 10 different interpretations of quantum mechanics. Some are deterministic, some are not. And according to Victor Stenger, there's no consensus as to what the right one is. This also may be an issue of unpredictability rather than uncausality.
Well, I'm willing to grant all those points for this. What's that? I'm going to make this quick as possible, but here are my premises that I believe show that you haven't proved that there's a personal God. It's the universe has a beginning. I'm willing to grant that. God's willingness to create the universe is eternal. I'm willing to grant that point. God's willingness to create the universe is causally sufficient for the existence of the universe. I'm willing to grant that point. If the cause is eternal and sufficient for the existence of something, then the thing is also eternal. If the thing is eternal, that means it doesn't have a beginning. Therefore, the universe does not have does not have a beginning, thus breaking the law of non-contradiction. The idea is that without time, you can't say that God, it's like Aristotle. At one point, he's sitting down and he plans to stand up and he stands up. That without time, you can't demarcate change. So
God doesn't change. So why?
There's no point where God is creating, or there's a point where God is both not creating and creating the universe.
The point at which he creates the universe is simultaneous with the creation of the universe. So time is created at the beginning, just as the argument that I put up there earlier was, just as the Bible talks about. And so God, when he creates and we're using temporal language because we're in time when I say when he creates, that's when the space-time continuum is created. So it's simultaneous with his creation event is when time begins.
Yeah, but that's a nonsensical argument.
Why is it nonsensical?
Because a cause can't be simultaneous to its effect. Give me an example within
Oh, sure. You see that projector right there?
Yep.
That projector is being simultaneously held by the bolts and that rod to the ceiling.
Okay.
The cause is simultaneous to that projector being held in the air.
But it wasn't being held before it was bolted on.
Well, there was a point when it began, that's true, but right now that cause is simultaneous with its effect.
Yeah, but you're saying that this cause has no antecedent, it has nothing before it. So
God has nothing before it because God's outside of time. In fact, this is even known through general relativity. In fact, this is from the, hold on, let me see if I can find it here. This is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which your own esteemed Dr. Tim McGrew who's sitting in the back here, has actually contributed to, particularly on the subject of miracles. This is not his article, but this is what the article says. The theory of relativity is generally taken to support the idea that the universe is a four-dimensional space-time block, that time is a matter of perspective, and that an ideal knower outside the universe would observe it all at once. So this is not illogical to believe this. But John, we can talk more after if you want. That's fine. Anybody else?
I'm going to ask real quick, anyone who has a question, if you could stand up and remain standing. We're going to bring people down here, but I'm going to need to see how many people have questions, just for pacing purposes. So, yeah, I see we've got someone coming here. Yeah, come on up. If anyone else has a question, just stand up and come down the aisle.
Sir, you don't need to bring all your books with you. What's your name?
Sankara.
Say again?
Sankara.
Sankara? Nice to meet you. Go ahead.
Well, I saw in the slides that you just qualified the pantheism and atheism as they are wrong. Why?
Why is pantheism and atheism wrong? Were you here for the whole presentation?
Yep.
Okay. Because the law of non-contradiction, if it is true that a theistic God exists, then it's not true that the universe is God or that there is no God.
Yeah, but the point is, like, for example, that's your assumption, right? And the assumption of people that believe in this way of religion. And in the other hand, the other religions, the other paths also have their own support and basis.
Well, that's true, but you have to look at each.
That's why you are not able to qualify. Why you qualify the others?
I don't understand what you mean. Why do I qualify the others?
To qualify them as wrong.
Well, you're qualifying me as wrong right now.
No, I'm saying
sure
what
you are. You're saying,
you did.
You're saying what I just said,
Yeah.
to say that theism was true and the others were false is wrong.
Yeah.
So you're doing the same thing that you're accusing me of doing. We're all doing that. The question is what's
first,
true.
Right? You did that first.
Okay. Yes,
So,
because I'm
that's
giving
what I mean.
Yes,
that's what I mean. You
yes,
see?
I'm giving the lecture, so I'm going to go first. That's true.
Yeah, that's what
But the point is that we're all making truth claims here. The pantheist, the atheist, the theist, we're all making truth claims. The question is, what is true? Now, let me submit to you that...
What you have, yes.
What's that?
Based on what you state here, yes, of course. Based
Yes.
on what they have also, they are true. So why are we judging them, as you said?
When we make truth claims, we make judgments, yes. You're making a judgment right now. So it's unavoidable. But we can make judgments without being judgmental, right? I'm open to evidence. If there's evidence that say pantheism is true or atheism is true, I'm open to it.
But it's the same as you were discussing here. There is not enough evidence for everything, right?
I think there's enough evidence to believe that Christianity is true. But every individual person has to assess the evidence for themselves. We have free will. We have minds. We're supposed to make the assessment ourselves because God's not going to force us to believe. He leaves it open to us in order to believe or not believe. It's up to us.
Yeah, but it's in some parts in the world, right? It's not just everywhere in the world.
What's everywhere in the world? What?
China, India, Asia, even in the Amazon, in the Andes, there are different, many kinds of religions.
Oh, I'm sure there are. But everybody has the same evidence that there's a creator God.
Not the same evidence.
Yes,
but
everyone has.
They have their own evidence.
Everybody has the same evidence that there's a creator and a moral creator. Because everybody has creation, everybody has conscience. So everybody knows there's a creator God who's a moral God. They don't know necessarily about Jesus, and we haven't even gotten there in this seminar yet.
They don't need to.
Well, if Jesus is who he said he was, if he is God, they do need to know about him.
They don't need to.
Why not?
Because they have their own
knowledge. But what if Jesus really is God?
Who is Jesus?
Well, who is he? He is the second person of the Trinity who added humanity over his deity to come to earth, live a perfect life in our place, die in our place, take the punishment of our sins on himself, so when we trust in him, we won't be punished by God's unchanging justice. That's who he claims to be. That's who I think he is. And if it were true, would you become a Christian?
No.
Why not?
Because, as I said...
Let me rephrase that. If it were true, really, that Jesus was God, would you become a Christian?
No. Why?
Why not?
Because it is an assumption and a religion that was
No, I'm not saying it's an assumption or religion. Let's say it's really true.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Because it was in a different part of the world, right? It comes from a culture, just from a society there. And as we know, as we were talking about human rights and everything, common sense and what's the truth, every society has the truth in their own way. So that's why do we have to believe in this? Or why do I have to be Christian, even if it is true?
Okay, well, the reason is, if it is true, is because everybody is a sinner, no matter where they come from. And Jesus is the only way that our sin can be paid for if we don't pay for it ourselves, because he's the only innocent sacrifice. See, if God is just, he has to punish sin. If he doesn't punish sin, he's not just. So he punishes an innocent substitute in our place. That's why Christ came. That's why he entered humanity in order to save us. So that's the purpose of life, is to know him and to make him known. And I invite you to at least, would you do this at least? Would you just say, go read the Gospel of John and pray that God would reveal to you that he really is Jesus, that Jesus really is who he said he was. Would you do that? You can give him the mic back, Kat. Go ahead.
Yeah, probably, because I am curious.
I'm sorry?
I'm curious. I want to know
more
in deep. Yeah,
and in fact, if I gave you a book, would you read it?
Probably, but...
Wait!
But
did you say probably?
Probably, yeah.
But would you do it? Because I don't give probablys.
That's my point.
Would you? If I gave it to you, would you read it?
If I want to learn more, yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
But
Rick in the back. No buts. All right, if you have one more thing to say, go ahead, Kat. Just give. Is there somebody else? Okay.
Anyone else? If we don't, sir, you can ask another question if you want.
Whoever has a question can come forward. That's fine. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
And thanks for your question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for accepting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have anyone else? Okay. Go on up.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
You too.
So
Matthew, by the way, means gift from God. Did you know that?
You're welcome. So, my question is, you are of the conclusion that the statements of the Christian Bible is the true account of why we're here.
Sure.
Why should I believe that account as opposed to maybe like the Book of the Latter-day Saints or the Quran?
Excellent question. That's a great question, because there's evidence that the New Testament accounts were written early by eyewitnesses, which contain embarrassing testimony they wouldn't have made up, which they died for, which also has extra biblical testimony from outside sources, which has Old Testament prophecy behind it, which has elaborate testimony that you couldn't explain unless they were eyewitnesses. In fact, your own Tim McGrew talks about that. It's called undesigned coincidences. There's archaeological evidence which backs it all up. Whereas if you look at the Quran, let's just take a look at the Quran. The Quran was written after Muhammad died. He died in 632 AD. It was standardized by the third Muslim caliph Uthman in 650 AD. And the Quran does not contain any miracles done by Muhammad. All the miracles attributed to Muhammad were attributed to him about 150 years or so later in the Hadith, the written traditions and sayings of what Muhammad said and did. So there are no eyewitness miracles of Muhammad. In fact, Muhammad denied doing miracles. Now, in the Quran, it says Jesus never died or rose from the dead. A substitute was put in its place. That's Surah 4, verse 157. This book is written over 600 years after the events. But you go back to the New Testament, and you've got 8 or 9 sources, depending upon who wrote the book of Hebrews, which has all of this evidence in it, which has been verified to be eyewitness testimony, and there's archaeological evidence behind it, that indicates that Jesus really did die and rise from the dead. Well, he certainly died. We know that. Even the great skeptic Bart Ehrman admits he died. There's no ancient historian who says that what the Quran says is true regarding Jesus. Even atheists admit Jesus died on the cross in 30 or 33 AD. So if you're going to look to a book to tell you what happened to Jesus, or you're going to look at a book that came 600 years after the events, or you're going to look at a collection of eyewitness documents written by contemporaries who were there, I'm going to go with the people who were there. Now, when you get to the Latter-day Saints, that's obviously even much further ahead. That's in the 1840s. And they're adding books to the Bible and saying that the Bible hasn't been translated right, or that it hasn't been copied right, or whatever. And the Mormon view, doesn't mean every Mormon believes this, but Mormons are polytheists. As man is, God once was. So they're adding a whole nother realm to the Christian worldview and actually going from theism to polytheism. And if you look for archaeological evidence for the Jews here in North America, or anything the Book of Mormon talks about, you will not find it. So that's why. And our book goes into great detail, by the way, Matthew. Here's a follow-up. Go ahead. You follow up here.
Well, I was just going to ask if you believe there are any prophets that would have come after John then, I believe? Or if it just kind of stopped.
I think the canon is closed since Revelation. I don't think there's more apostles that are getting new revelation now. I think that we have enough revelation there that keeps us busy, and we know enough about, what life's about, and when, and that Jesus is one day going to come back. We don't really need any more new revelation. I can't live up to what's already given. So.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Matthew.
Okay, I think we're a little over time. I think we can take one more question if anyone has one.
I was under the impression we could go longer. Don't we have till 10 if we need it? Or no?
I believe we have the room until we need to be out of here by 9:30, I believe.
Is that true?
Yeah. Around then, yeah.
Don says maybe. All right, well, we got to take a few more if we got it.
We can keep going. Just. Okay, go.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Yannick.
Say again?
Yannick.
Yanni?
Yannick.
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 Yannick. What's on your shirt?
It's Skinner.
Oh, B.F. Skinner. Okay. Go ahead.
So it is a play on words.
All right.
What would Skinner do? So I haven't really formulated this question completely, but how would you answer the question coming from either someone from psychology or from neurology stating, in a sense, determinism based on just stimulus input, and behavioral output?
That is an excellent question. I'm glad you brought it up, Yannick. Probably the easiest way to point out that scientists will never discover were made of materials is that in order to make such a discovery, they will have to assume that we're not made of materials.
Could you clarify that?
Okay. How do scientists, when they look at the data, they'll go in and they'll stimulate a part of the brain, and then the person will have to say, or the doctor will say, what are you thinking about? Well, I'm thinking about X. Well, maybe the neurologist can associate certain parts of the brain with certain thoughts or certain feelings or certain emotions. That certainly can be done. But in order to get that data and evaluate it, the doctor or the scientist has to assume that he is not just the same kind of molecular machine in order to evaluate the data and come to a conclusion. If he's just a molecular machine as he's evaluating somebody else's brain, how can he be sure his results are true? See what I'm saying? And
I guess what I'm with you right here. For me, one of the biggest challenges is exactly the claim for naturalism, like full naturalism, full determinism, which I think in a lot of today's scientific realm, we've drove away a little bit from the dualistic aspect, having the little man inside your mind, and it's explained away via just stimulus inputs. There's neurological processes going on,
but the problem, in order to discover those neurological processes, is you'd have to be a free will soul that can evaluate the data objectively and discover these correlations between minds or brain states and behavior. In order to do that, you can't just be a molecular machine, because there'd be no way to trust your results. Because the very process of you doing the experiment, you're a molecular machine. So why should you believe what you're doing? You see? So oddly enough, in order for a scientist to discover that materialism is true, the scientist has to assume materialism's false. You see what I'm saying? It's a self-defeating proposition. Good question, though. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Tim.
Hey, Tim. You know what Tim means?
Tell me.
Make me a sandwich. No, it doesn't mean that. I'm just kidding.
Doesn't mean that to me. I have two very closely related questions. I have a degree in apologetics, and I now work in a church. And
where'd you get your degree?
I got a bachelor in worldviews in apologetics from Boyce College. They're the undergrad of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Oh, whereabouts?
That's in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, good.
That's where Al Mohler is.
Sure. Yeah.
But anyways, I work in a church now, and I'm very convinced, especially through the works of Nancy Pearcey, of the importance of teaching things like the importance of absolute truth, and arguing there, because I totally see in different teen ministries I'm involved in throughout the community that I see a lot of teens who'd say they're Christians, and very well probably are, and they say that they believe everything we teach them, but there's this secular worldview that's come in that has told them that that's what's right for them. And so they believe it, but they believe it's what's right for them, and they don't believe it's an absolute truth, and then there's not as much passion and things like that. So the two questions, I guess, are, one, what are some ways a guy working in a church like me could help in regular teaching and things like that, teach things like you're saying right here, that there is absolute truth. And the second question kind of goes with it. How can I convince other people within the church, like elders and other leaders within the church, the importance of, I guess, apologetics?
Yeah, those are excellent questions. One thing you can do is come to our Cross-Examine Instructor Academy this August. It's our 7th annual. Myself, Greg Kokel, J. Warner Wallace, a cold case homicide detective, Ted Wright, our executive director, Richard Howe, several other people teach for 3 days. People like you who already have an apologetic base, how to present material like this and how to deal with questions. Getting people excited about it, if I had the answer to that would be, that'd be gold. I do see this, though. Most people, except the good people here, when they hear about an apologetic event, they, maybe I'll go, maybe I won't. Those that come get excited because, well, I never knew this stuff existed. In fact, we were over in Denmark, did a debate before over 1,000 people, and there were several people there who said, I've never heard any of these arguments. Now, they went from, I know one guy went from atheism to Christianity. Another guy just went from, or a bunch of guys went from atheism to agnosticism because they had never heard arguments for God. So sometimes just getting some of the evidence out there is enough to convince people. Now, from a pragmatic level, 75% of young people who are brought up in the church walk away from the church once they leave the home. It's not all intellectual, but some of it is. And so from a pragmatic level, you want to get them evidence. And also, it's commanded in the Bible. If you're a Christian, you know, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Paul says, demolish arguments in 2 Corinthians 10:5. Peter says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. So that would be my advice. If you go to our website, crossexamine.org, it's all up there. And get our app, too. The app is free, so get the kids to download it, and they can go through the stuff for themselves.
All right, well, thank you.
All right, thanks, Tim. Thanks for what you're doing. All righty, folks.
Hey.
Thanks, Kat. All right, folks, thank you so much for being here. Check out our app. Please download it and sign up for our email, too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And thanks to Ratio Christie.
Yep, thanks for coming out. Check us out on Tuesday nights.